Okay, so hi again, this is Catherine. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. The recording from this will go up on YouTube within the next 3 days or so. So you'll get an email most likely somewhere Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with the link to this recording as well as the slides, which will have all the links to the various software I'm going to be talking about. And we are going to be focusing today on software for PC, Mac, or Linux, so for desktop and laptop computers. If you only have a smartphone or tablet, this may not be terribly useful to you. Sorry about that in advance. If you want to stick around just for the fun of it, feel free, but up to you. And let's see. So I'm just going to check if we have anything in the chat. Yes, handouts will be sent. Excellent. So I will leave the chat to Stacy from here on out. So Stacy, feel free to stop me if someone has an urgent question. All right, so when I say free software, because that's what I was advertising, I am predominantly talking about free as in it doesn't cost you money. There's another term that you might see bandied about by some of these software websites, which is open source, and that usage of free as in freedom, as opposed to not costing money. I believe all the ones I'm going to be talking about in detail today are open source, but I mainly just wanted to avoid the programs that have more sort of dodgy models with, if it has a lot of ads or if it has the free tier is very limited. These are all also software that you can install directly to your own computer as opposed to live services that you would access on the internet, cloud services, things like Google Documents or Canva, which some of you may have heard about from the last Photo Tools workshop that I did. So moving right along, unless anyone has any questions about that, I'll give you a moment. In any case, if you do think of a question later, feel free to pose it at any time. If it's very tangential, I may hold it to the end. So the first category of software I wanted to talk about is desktop publishing. I have two software in that field that I'm going to talk about. LibreOffice is your standard Office suite, so analogous to Microsoft Office, although not exactly the same, of course. And then Scribus is more of an answer to something like Microsoft Publisher, in that it's more for layouts and, for documents that contain both text and images and have particular layout concerns that you want a consistent layout on every page, such as a newsletter, magazine, trifold pamphlet, that sort of thing. So LibreOffice, if you've used older versions of Microsoft Word, it's going to look very, very similar, particularly for LibreOffice Writer, which is this one. LibreOffice, I think it's Calc, the spreadsheet program, is also very familiar. And those are the two that I would recommend the most. I mean, you install the entire suite, it doesn't cost any money, and it doesn't take that much space, so it's not a big disadvantage. But those are the two tools that I recommend the most out of those, simply because though they do have a PowerPoint analog, it's a little bit less powerful, I would say, than PowerPoint. And it does have issues with opening PowerPoint files where the formatting and the sizing of visual elements can really get screwed up. Whereas LibreOffice Writer tends to not have very serious problems, if any. Rarely does it have problems at all with Word files, and similarly for Calc with Excel files. You may also have heard of OpenOffice. This is a fork of the same software, which is to say it's taking the same code base because it is open source and then taking it in a bit of a different direction. And has kind of gradually started to eclipse OpenOffice in popularity. Now, Scribus is a little bit more niche. I wouldn't recommend it as heavily to most people, probably. Firstly, because again, it's for these things that have more complicated layouts. If most of your document is going to have text and then you're just going to have maybe a couple of images, then LibreOffice Writer will do perfectly well for your needs. But for a more complicated layout that you want to be the same from page to page, Scribus can be pretty good. You can see these dotted lines here. These red dotted lines are guides that show you where everything's going to be placed. The one thing I would say is that compared to competing software I've used, it is a bit clunky. Like it takes more clicks to accomplish the same thing, to accomplish the same thing than it would in, say, Publisher, generally speaking. That may be a problem with my lack of familiarity with the software to some degree, but I do think that it's a little bit harder to use overall. With that said, price tag of $0 you cannot argue with if you need this type of software. So some of these, and you will see this theme coming up a lot, some of these do have, the graphical interface is not as pretty, or a little bit less well thought out perhaps, or just because it's unfamiliar, it may seem hard to use. That's sort of the hazard you run into with free software, because designing a good user interface does cost money, unfortunately. So unless anyone has any burning questions about desktop publishing or suggestions for software they themselves have liked, we can move on. All right. So for drawing and photo editing, I did talk about both of these briefly in the Photo Tools workshop as well, which are Inkscape and GNU Image Manipulation Program, also known as GIMP. Inkscape looks something like this, and it's a drawing program, but specifically it's a raster drawing program. Now what that means, sorry, it's a vector drawing program. Got it the wrong way around. Vector drawings are where your drawing is made up of curves and lines instead of out of dots. What this means is that it's great for drawing something like a logo that needs to be able to be printed in multiple sizes. Like let's say you need a very small size for use on a website, and then a large resolution size for printing on a poster. Well, in that case, a vector drawing program will be a very good option for you because all those curves are going to stay smooth when you scale up the image rather than becoming blurry or jagged. And with that said, resizing in image editing programs has gotten better over the years, but it's not perfect. And some people do use this for more digital painting type purposes as well. But I think more popular for digital painting would be something like GIMP, which tries to be kind of an answer to Photoshop. And GIMP I have been using for years, on and off. So you can do the standard photo correction things. You may or may not be able to make this out, but there's a little window here that says sharpen, so you can sharpen images. It has those artistic filters like to make it look like a watercolor or an oil painting or a pencil drawing. It has red eye removal, that sort of thing. Also great for resizing and cropping images, of course, and it has a number of drawing and painting tools, which are here in the toolbox. It supports layers, so where you have one sort of a translucent layer that you're drawing on, and it doesn't alter the background. So that way, if you decide you've made a mistake, then it's much easier to correct or just to remove the bad bit of drawing. A lot of different selection tools. So it is very powerful, but it does have quite the learning curve. If you just need to, say, to resize and scale your images, you'd be just as fine with one of the free tools you may already have, such as Paint. I mean, this is free, but you may find it more trouble than it's worth to have this complex of an interface. But if you are looking to take a deeper dive into either digital painting or image editing, GIMP may be pretty useful for you. And similarly to Photoshop, it does support adding additional like paintbrushes and stuff for extra effects. Any questions about that? Take that as a no. All right, so in multimedia, I have a whole jumble of different types of things here. We do have something in the chat. Simpler photo editing programs. So what simpler photo editing programs are there out there? I was predominantly, I mean, the thing is that your computer might come with one, such as Paint, or now it's 3D Paint is the more fancy one. There's also a lot of, if you want to get into the cloud services, there are a lot of ones that I covered in the photo tool class that are, in some cases, they have a very, very specific functionality that you can use, such as there's the remove.bg, which just removes backgrounds. So they'll have a very simple functionality. They may have some restrictions because they're only for, you know, because they're trying to sell you on a premium service as well. But what they do very simply. They make it very easy for you to use them. Remove.bg, and then the free one is called Paint. If you have free Microsoft Paint, which should come pre-installed if you have a Windows computer, probably XP and up, something like that. I wouldn't know for sure before that. I can look into that more for you. But honestly, it's not too bad. If you just have a couple of tasks that you do regularly, it's not too bad just using GIMP. The other thing is that generally speaking, there is an edit option out of your file browser on your computer that will take you to a very simple editor that lets you resize the images. Okay, so I don't want to keep clicking into the chat. If there are more questions, Stacy, if you can read them off. Okay, I presume it's getting handled in chat.
Yeah, we're okay for right now.
Cool, cool, cool. Thank you, Stacy. In any case, if I miss anything going along, we'll cover it at the end. So multimedia programs, I have a video editor. I have a 3D modeling program. This is another one that's just going to be a really complex thing, but if you want to get into it, a media player and an audio editor, which is a lot more simple. So OpenShot video editor, which is a relatively straightforward video editor, but has a bit more in the way of features than something like iMovie or Windows Media Player, one or the other of which probably came included with your computer if you have a somewhat recent operating system, unless you're on Linux, in which case you might have OpenShot or another competing open source video editor pre-installed. So OpenShot, it works pretty similarly for the basic functionality. You add your files, you can add them in different tracks. So that's one thing that not all free video editors support, is you'll have multiple tracks of video and or audio and or images. And the images, if they're translucent or transparent, can be layered on top of the other video. So if you want to put a title card that is overlaid over the first few seconds, or if you want to put something with your name, something like that, then you can do that with OpenShot. It also supports a fair number of transitions and some effects that are built in, and will allow you to have a little bit finer of control on the timing of cuts than some of the free options. Some of the free options are pretty limited, or they'll only export to a few formats, which is a bit of a problem if you need a particular format, or they'll have limitations on the size, et cetera, et cetera. So the one thing I would say, even though it's relatively straightforward, is that editing video is always going to take a lot of power from your computer. What that means concretely is that if you do have an older computer or a computer that is just not very powerful, it will take a while to export the video at the end, and it might be a little bit like there might be some loading times or some stuttering when you're trying to preview the video, or you're trying to like move yourself through the video to get to a particular point. This is just, it's not something of the particular software, it's just the nature of video editing, unfortunately. I would say that in general, for those of you who are on very limited computers but do have internet access reliably, that's one of the big advantages of cloud services, and that's something you would want to look into, or just accept that for some purposes like this, you are going to have some performance issues. I mean, with that said, my computer is like 7 years old and I can edit videos on it. It's just that it does take a while to export. Similarly for Blender, 3D modeling. So this does 3D modeling. It does 3D and 2D animation. That's a 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional. 3D modeling is another thing that is just inherently really heavy duty on the computer to do. So you may have some performance issues and or just long export times if you do try to use a program like this on an older computer, or one that's, is either a low end or a super lightweight type computer, where they sacrificed speed for lightweight and battery life, right? So what you see on the screen here is a screenshot of how it looks like. A screenshot of how it looks like in the sculpting mode. So you can literally, take a pre-made shape, in this case a sphere, and you can draw on it and pull out bits of it. So there are several modes here that you can use, and it really is a tremendously complex program. There are some tutorials online for it, but honestly, a lot of it is just that 3D modeling itself is complex. It's not that the program is overly complex for what it does. But yeah, just in case there's any digital artist types in here, I wanted to recommend one of those programs, and because it is a very well-respected program. So we're going to finish off the PowerPoint with something that's a little bit more user-friendly, and in fact chosen for that reason, which is VLC, which is a media player that just plays almost anything. Sometimes, depending on what formats you're trying to play back, you can have issues where you'll need a couple of different pieces of software to try to play it. VLC was trying to address that by having one software that would play virtually everything. So it plays video files. In this case, it's a video that I took on my cell phone a couple years ago, I think on the pier at Santa Cruz. But it also plays DVDs or Blu-ray if you have an appropriate disk drive attached to your computer. And it'll play streams, but I haven't really used that functionality. And there's also a lot you can do. You can't see it here, of course, but there's a lot of different skins for the interface if you want it to look different. But here I have a pretty basic one. Oh, false alarm. We have Audacity as well, which I had forgotten. But Audacity is an audio editing program. Similarly to OpenShot, it does support having multiple tracks. So you can combine audio from different sources. You can record audio directly in the software. This bar at the top with the pause, play, stop, forward, back. It also has this red record button, right? So if you have a microphone or something attached to your computer or an instrument, then you can record sound off of that. And it has, you can fade it in and out, you can cut wherever you want with very fine control, which I've used to do audio for some videos before. Somewhat niche, but a powerful and not too complicated to use tool. All right, so that wraps up the basic roundup. I can show you what some of the programs look like from the inside, but at this point, I wanted to just handle a couple of logistical things and then wrap up the recording before we move into questions. So the slides and the recording will be sent to all registered attendees within 2 to 3 days. So if some of your friends didn't make it today, but they wanted to come, you can feel free to let them know that they'll have their slides and their recording soon enough. If you think of any questions after hopping off of the Zoom call, feel free to send them to ssfpladm@plsinfo.org, which is our public-facing email address that where we take all sorts of questions on all sorts of subjects. Does not have to be related to this class. All right, so thank you, and I'm going to stop recording.